when you're teaching about Islam in with these new standards, it's looking at Islam from a historical perspective. It is not teaching the religion as it is looking at Muhammad as a historical figure and the religion that he establishes and how that religion ultimately spreads through the region and kind of what the repercussions in the long run are. Ultimately, when we talk about the Middle Ages in Europe, we're going to talk about the Crusades, and we're fighting the Muslims in the Crusades. And in order to have that background to understand why that's happening, you've got to talk about the Islamic world. And I would also argue that the Renaissance, which is another topic that we will hit on before the end of the year, a big part of what brought on the Renaissance was the returning of ancient classical texts from Rome and from Greek that had been preserved by the Muslims. A lot of that stuff had been lost in Europe for one reason or another, but the Islamic world saw value in it, and they preserved those things and recopied those things and had them in their great universities, throughout the world, or throughout the Islamic world. And trade is what ultimately brings that stuff back. So the lesson that I want to talk about a little bit today is about the innovations and adaptations that the Islamic world made during this time. And one of the standards for this unit is to examine, I'm sorry, I'm going to read from the wall, is to examine and summarize the contribution of Muslim scholars made to later civilizations in areas of science, geography, mathematics, philosophy, medicine, art, and literature. And so what I did with my students for this is actually a lesson that I came across online. But essentially, they were given a reading about these different fields, and we looked at everything from city design to literature to geography, all the things that were in the standard. And essentially, what the kids did was they worked in pairs, and they explored a series of images. So math teachers, you're welcome for this one. So one of the things they learned about was algebra, because algebra, which this year the state is, or at least Metro is replacing with integrated math, but algebra is a math subject that came from the Islamic world. And so we talk a little bit about the guy that came up with algebra, and we look at him as a historical figure and how algebra is still something that's taught in school today. Another area that we talked about was geography, and the importance of geography, is something that we're still teaching again today, another class subject, school subject. And, ideas that are coming out of the Islamic world during this time surrounding geography are, the idea that the earth is not the center of the universe, that, this idea that's a lot of times contributed to Copernicus is an idea that is really coming out of, to some degree, out of the Islamic world. And so, at the time that medieval Europe is kind of in what is called the Dark Ages, the Islamic world is flourishing. And so the purpose of this lesson is to get and see kind of a broader picture of, this Islamic empire, this Islamic world is more than just the religion itself. It is a culture, it is art, it is, advancements in things that we still use today in medicine, in literature. And the point of this lesson was to get the kids to kind of see those things, realize how some of these topics and ideas around them in their everyday life are influenced by, if not directly coming from a Muslim scholar at some point in the kind of period of the 6th century through the 15th century that we're looking at in class. And so with this information, they had to do kind of mini presentations. Like after they kind of went through all of them, each pair was assigned a placard to come up and present and talk about the matches that they made and the conclusions that they drew. And ultimately they had a test over this material today, which I've got a grade. And I'm hoping that those grades turn out to be good.